Here you save money for your future, and you don't know how long the strike is going to be, if it's going to be a week or two, although that's what they thought. It was going to be just 2 weeks and they'd be back. And here we are, almost 10 months, and they're still out. I don't know how people can survive.
The right to strike is organized labor's ultimate weapon. But its use usually comes at a high cost to union members who are called on to make painful sacrifices. Sacrifices that no one can imagine until they have to put their jobs on the union line. Secure, steady employment is important to everyone. If your job was to end or suddenly be interrupted, everything else in your life would surely be affected. This is why job security is a critical issue in most union campaigns. The union claims that if it becomes your representative, your job will be more secure. Yet at the same time, the union's ability to call a strike and take members off their jobs is one of the few real powers the union gains if it wins the right to represent you. So which does union membership bring? Greater job security or the constant threat of a work interruption? There's no proof a union does anything to contribute to a company's productivity, competitiveness, or profits. In fact, inefficient union work rules and costly confrontations can have devastating results for companies and their employees. Historically, some of the biggest layoffs have been in the most heavily unionized industries, such as steel and automobiles. A union contract cannot keep an employer in business or make a company's payroll. Even unionized employers have the right to reduce their workforce and close their facilities. Once, nearly 1,000 people worked at this manufacturing plant in Kentucky. Based largely on promises of better pay, benefits, and working conditions, employees voted in favor of union representation. But within less than 2 years, this facility was closed. Production was transferred to a plant in another state. A loss of market share and reduced orders were reasons for the shutdown. Despite what employees had been promised by organizers, union representation did nothing to provide long-term improvements and protect jobs.
Some actions taken by unions directly threaten the job security of members. Here's a letter from a union to an employer. The first paragraph states that an employee has failed to become a member of the union and pay dues. The second paragraph says, "We therefore request that in accordance with the union contract, this employee be discharged." A request like this is not unusual. People accused of violating certain provisions of the union's constitution, local bylaws, or collective bargaining contract can be let go by their employer at the union's request. During contract negotiations, unions bargain hard for this kind of power. Then there's superseniority. Superseniority means employees who are also officials of the union are given more seniority than they've earned, thereby helping to protect them from layoffs, while employees with greater seniority are let go first. The interest of the union and its special friends are put ahead of the job security and welfare of regular members. A tactic that could be especially dangerous to your job security is the union boycott. As incredible as it may seem, the union tries to pressure the customers of a unionized company to quit doing business with that company. This usually happens when the union fails to get something it wants during contract negotiations. Successful boycotts can endanger the jobs and futures of union-represented employees. Employees like those at a Whirlpool factory in Arkansas. When the union failed to get what it demanded during new contract negotiations, it began a campaign to discourage the public from buying Whirlpool appliances. Many union members saw this as a direct threat to their job security.
I've been there for over 17 years, and I was a dues-paying member for 17 years, and I go along with what they're doing. I don't go along with the boycott. It's going to cost us our jobs.
I don't really believe the union gives much thought to the fact that the product they're boycotting is the same product that brings them a good livelihood as well as many others in this area.
Well, if it worked, it could cost us our jobs. That's what it could do.
By condoning this boycott, they're trying to give our jobs away, the ones they're supposed to be protecting.
One of the most serious things that can potentially happen to unionized employees is never mentioned by organizers: the union strike. If the issue is raised, people are told strikes are a thing of the past. The truth is, strikes still happen, and more frequently than you might think. During the most recent 6-year period, unions called strikes that affected hundreds of thousands of people. On average, these strikes lasted more than a month. Many, however, went on for several months. Some lasted a year or longer. It's important that you understand the ways a union member's life immediately changes when they go on strike. First, they no longer receive a paycheck. Second, benefits such as medical coverage are suspended. Yes, members can be eligible for union strike benefits, but at most unions, this only amounts to about $50 a week and doesn't begin until members have been on strike at least 2 weeks. Employees who go on strike in most states are not qualified to receive unemployment compensation. Sometimes this is misunderstood, and people believe that because they're out of work, they can collect unemployment benefits. But if you have followed the union and gone on strike, laws in 48 of the 50 states prevent you from receiving compensation. So add that to the list. No pay, no benefits, no unemployment check. And finally, workers who go on strike for economic reasons can be permanently replaced. This is not illegal. The National Labor Relations Board has said, quote, "An employer may permanently replace economic strikers," end quote. Sometimes employers are forced to hire replacements to remain in business. And although the law requires that strikers who wish to return to work be put on a recall list after the strike is settled and be offered any jobs they're qualified for as openings become available, this does not guarantee that all strikers will go back to their former positions, or for that matter, any position at all. Virtually all strikes affect people's lives in ways that no one can predict. Most strikes quickly become emotional. Both sides are caught up in events beyond their control. When over 700 union-represented employees at the Basic Vegetable Products plant in King City, California, walked off their jobs in July of 1999, most believed they would be back to work in a few days. The company had a relationship with the Teamsters Union going back to the 1950s. There had never been a strike at the facility, and one wasn't expected as negotiations began for a new contract. What was different was the increased competition now facing the company. Basic was losing its share of the market while competitors were gaining. Added to this was the fact that prices for the company's products were down. If Basic Vegetable was to remain competitive and continue to provide good long-term jobs, ways to reduce costs and improve productivity had to be agreed on and negotiated into a new contract. The company was determined that its King City plant remain open, unlike many other unionized food processing operations in the area that had been forced to close. But the union said no to every cost-saving suggestion and demanded increases. With negotiations at a standstill, the union called a strike. Members were told by their union leaders that management would not be able to operate the plant without them and would soon agree to a settlement. But the facility remained open. A workforce of replacement employees, managers, and former strikers kept the plant alive. As more people returned to work, they discovered conditions inside the plant were very different from what the union was telling them on the picket line.
The union representative said it would be 2 weeks and we'd be back again. Because those supervisors aren't going to be able to start the machinery and the mechanics don't know what they're doing, they thought the company wasn't going to run, but when I came back, I saw differently. Everything was running.
We expected it to be a short strike, something that was going to get taken care of within 3 weeks, like myself. I was in the committee. I was a shop steward in the union, and I also believed it. I also saw that there was a lot of misleadingness from within the union, out in the field, and that was sort of the big disappointment that we had.
A strike the union said would last only days dragged into weeks, then months. The closely knit community began to suffer as neighbors and even family members turned against each other. Some remained on the picket line, shouting their anger and frustration. Others made the even tougher decision to return to work.
It was kind of hard crossing the line, having everybody yelling at us and calling us names. It was hard. It's kind of sad that I lost good friends that I have been with for a long time. But I had to come to work. No one else was going to help me.
Actually, my first day in, I got visited right after work from a union rep and 2 strikers, which actually indirectly threatened my family, my children. I mean, they said that my kids wouldn't be able to play outside, peacefully. That I would have to be watching out for them. And I got upset because there was a union rep standing next to them as they were saying this to me.
The first time the car window was shot out, it was a little unnerving, but then the second time I felt really bad for my kids because my youngest son, who's 3, was like crying, "Is it a monster, Daddy?" My oldest son had some real legitimate fears. He was like, "Well, Dad, do you think anybody's going to come in the house? If they're going to come into our car, where the car is, are they going to come into the house and hurt us?" And, it was really hard to comfort them at times.
The first few days that we came to work, for me, it was very heart-wrenching. One is that coming across the picket line was nerve-wracking. I didn't know what to expect. There was a lot of people out there yelling, hollering. The first days was very depressing because one is that my husband was out, especially during that time, and the work was here, and he was staying out because of the union. And the only thing that helped me was actually coming to work to deal with it, because I forgot about what was actually transpiring at home.
Well, I've had some difficult experiences, verbal insults. My car, my family, windows at my house have been damaged. I've got to feed my family. Speaking with family members, extremely difficult right now. I've got 2 sisters that have found out. I've come back to work. They've stopped talking to me. My mother, it's difficult for her because she's caught in the middle and she doesn't want to take a side one way or the other. It hurts me a lot. It still hurts me because it's my family.
When I came back to work, there was a couple of incidents that I had, but I really didn't pay attention to them, of saying that I was on their hit list. They were saying that I was next because I was taking somebody's job away from them. And my words to my fellow coworkers out there was that I'm not taking anybody's job away, I'm getting my job back, and that's why I'm in here, for myself and especially for my family.
Now, months into the strike, daily reports of violence and vandalism had become common throughout the town. King City was a community being torn apart by a union strike. Local union leaders continued to claim the company was losing money and would soon give in to their demands. Nearly a year after it began, the strike continued, but the pickets at the front gate were now gone. Most of the strikers who turned down the opportunity to go back to work had been replaced. Inside the plant, the lines again were running at full capacity. Production and efficiency were up compared to before the strike. Opinions about the union were changing.
When people went on strike, I don't think they understood all the issues. There was a lot of questions. They weren't given all the information, first of all, by their union representatives. Now that we've been operating for the last almost 10 months, I personally like the way the situation is now without the union.
When you have a union at any job, if there's a problem or you're not happy about something, you first have to go to the union rep. The union rep then has to go to the supervisor, and then he comes to the office to complain. And it seems to me much better now because we can go directly to the office to talk to them about what we're feeling.
The relationship between the supervisor and myself, without a union, without a third party, it's been good. It's been real good. Now I see that we don't need a union. I personally don't need a union.
A year after this strike began, the former strikers who had returned to their jobs were putting their lives and careers back together. The company had been able to function throughout the strike and reach the productivity goals it had once tried to negotiate with the union. Many strikers had left the area to find work elsewhere. Others clung to the hope that one day their lives could return to normal. Eventually, the plant was sold to another large food processing company, and 25 months after it began, the strike ended. According to the new contract bargained by the union, returning strikers received the same pay they earned before the strike, but now with no prospect of an increase for at least 5 years. Benefits were also the same as before the strike. More than 2 years of sacrifices made by striking union members had produced no real improvements. Hundreds of lives had been turned upside down. But for what?
When union-represented employees go on strike, there are no guarantees. A company might agree to some of the union's demands, but members have no way of knowing if the financial and personal cost of being out of work can ever be made up. The loss of goodwill and cooperation is impossible to estimate. Often damage is done that can never be repaired. Many strikes end in a stalemate. No one wins, not the employer, the union, or the union members. This is not uncommon. Employees make financial and personal sacrifices only to have their union finally call them back to work with the same pay, benefits, or working conditions as before the strike. And there are strikes like the one you just saw that drag on for months or years without a resolution. Maybe one day, long after people's lives have been disrupted, the union will decide the strike is over.
I guess the final straw was a plant that I had organized, a group of workers that I had organized, and that had been on strike for 6.5 months. And the union called me up and ordered me to end the strike, sign the contract, without a vote from the workers. Simply sign the contract, put them back to work. We've spent all the money we're going to spend, and they're not that big a bargaining unit anyway. It was only like 50 or 60 workers, and dump them. And we did.
The only way to be sure that your future is never torn apart by a union strike is to never turn control of your working life over to the union. Never put yourself in the position of choosing between either the union or continuing to work to support yourself and your family. Reject the union's misleading promises of job security. In fact, when it comes to long-term job security, today unions are part of the problem, not the solution. By working union-free, you keep the power to deal directly with management about your job and future. You aren't forced to work under inefficient, counterproductive union rules that could undermine the health of this organization and its ability to provide employment. You aren't controlled by one-sided provisions in labor contracts meant to give security to only the union and its special friends. And you'll never be put in danger of sacrificing your pay, benefits, or future during a union strike.
My wife's getting upset. It's been 10 months, and I understand where she's coming from. It's been a rough 10 months. It's not easy by any means. People just don't understand why we're out here. We don't understand why we're even out here.